Greetings, traveler of the infinite dark. Come, rest your weary mind, and allow me to unveil a truth that has slumbered in shadow since before the stars themselves learned to weep. Tonight, I shall guide you through a chronicle that history has deliberately forgotten, a tale of gods and monsters, where the line between savior and destroyer dissolves like ash upon the cosmic wind. If you find value in these forbidden histories, I ask only that you mark this sanctuary with your favor, that others might find their way to these twilight revelations. Now settle deep into the embrace of darkness. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm of dying suns, and prepare yourself for the secret war that shaped the very fabric of existence. Let the story carry you gently into the eternal night. In the vast tapestry of cosmic memory, certain truths are written not in light, but in the spaces between stars, in the pregnant silence, where even photons dare not tread. The universe, you see, knows many names for Thanos of Titan, conqueror, tyrant, the mad titan who sought balance through annihilation. But these are simple words, painted across the surface of an infinitely deeper darkness. And like all simple stories told by frightened children huddled around dying fires, they are both true and profoundly, catastrophically incomplete. Long before the Infinity Stones sang their siren song through his dreams, before the purple-skinned warlord became the nightmare that haunted 1,000 worlds, there existed a different Thanos, younger, perhaps, though age is a peculiar currency for those born beneath alien suns. This Thanos sought not balance, but understanding. He pursued not death, but the secret architecture of life itself. And in that pursuit, in the cold and airless ruins of forgotten civilizations, he discovered something that would transform him from mere conqueror into something far more terrible, far more necessary, a prophet who had glimpsed the true face of divinity and found it wanting. Picture him now, if your mind's eye can pierce the veils of time, seated upon his sanctuary, that floating throne of stone, and metal drifting through the cosmic void like a tombstone marking the grave of hope itself. The galaxy spreads before him in all its terrible, beautiful immensity. A billion worlds spinning their slow dance toward oblivion, each one ignorant of the hunger that watches from beyond the veil. He does not smile, he does not rage, he simply waits, wrapped in a silence so profound it seems to devour even the memory of sound. The story he told the universe, the parable of balance, the necessity of culling, the mathematical inevitability of resource collapse. This was a mask, carefully crafted and deliberately simple, a banner for his armies to rally beneath, a philosophy that lesser minds could grasp, could rail against, could ultimately comprehend. For how does one explain the unexplainable? How do you warn a universe of children that the gods they worship are not their shepherds, but their farmers? How do you speak the unspeakable truth that every prayer whispered into the darkness is heard not by protectors, but by predators? So he gave them a lie they could understand. He became the monster their simple cosmology could contain. He spoke of finite resources and infinite hunger, of the cruel mathematics of survival, of the mercy found in swift extinction rather than slow starvation. And they believed him. They believed because the lie was simpler than the truth, because the surface horror was preferable to the bottomless abyss that yawned beneath. But Thanos himself never forgot. How could he? The knowledge burned within him like a star collapsing in upon itself, dense and inescapable. Its gravity warping every thought, every decision, every moment of his increasingly solitary existence. At night, though night and day are meaningless concepts in the unchanging void, he would stand at the precipice of his sanctuary and gaze out at the universe with eyes that had seen too much, that carried the weight of a burden no single being was ever meant to bear. Somewhere out there, in the unfathomable distances between galaxies, they waited, the Celestes, the space gods, the architects of creation itself. And they were hungry asterisk. The memory returns to him unbidden, as it always does in these quiet moments, a fragment of the past that plays and replays in the theater of his mind like an ancient recording trapped in an eternal loop. He sees his own hand, younger and perhaps less certain, reaching out toward a crystallized mural on a dead world whose name the universe has long since forgotten. The surface of the crystal is cold beneath his touch, so cold it seems to leach the very heat from his bones, and as his fingers make contact, he feels it a whisper of something vast and terrible and infinitely patient, watching from the spaces between dimensions, waiting with the patience of entities for whom time is not a river but an ocean. He recoils. Even now, eons removed from that first contact, the memory makes him recoil, for in that moment, in that single crystalline instant of connection, he had felt the edges of a truth too large for any mortal mind to contain. A truth that would require years, decades, centuries of investigation to fully comprehend. A truth that once fully understood would leave him no choice but to become the universe's greatest devil in order to serve as its most desperate savior. What did he discover in those dark corners of the cosmos, you ask? What revelation was so profound, so fundamentally reality-shattering, that it could transform a warlord into a weapon aimed at the heart of divinity itself? To answer that question, we must journey back through the corridors of memory, back to a world that no longer exists, back to the moment when Thanos the Conqueror became Thanos the God-Killer, though no one, not even he, knew it yet. The world was called Praeteria, and it had been magnificent. Even in death, Praeteria retained a ghostly echo of its former grandeur. Thanos's warship descended through an atmosphere that had grown thin and silent, past the skeletal remains of orbital constructs that had once gleamed like jewels against the darkness of space. Now they were tombs, their corridors filled with the frozen dead, their magnificent architecture transformed into a cosmic mausoleum where no one would ever come to mourn. The Praetorians had been builders, dreamers, architects of wonders that made even the vaunted technology of Xandar seem primitive by comparison. Their cities had stretched across continents, vertical forests of crystalline spires that sang in harmonic resonance with the planet's magnetic field, creating a symphony that could allegedly be heard from orbit. They had mastered energy manipulation, had bent the fundamental forces of physics to their will, had stood on the precipice of ascending beyond mere flesh into something approaching the eternal. And then, in a single night that had occurred 3,000 years before Thanos' arrival, they had simply ... ended. There had been no war. The archaeological evidence was unambiguous on this point. No bombardment from space, no weapons of mass destruction, no biological warfare or environmental collapse. The cities stood intact. The technology remained functional. The very plates of food on their tables had been preserved by the planet's sudden and inexplicable shift into a state of suspended decay. But the people, all 6 billion of them, from the smallest infant to the eldest philosopher, had simply ceased to exist, as though they had been plucked from reality by the fingers of an irritated god. Thanos had come seeking weapons. The Praetorians' reputation for technological magnificence had echoed across the centuries, and what warlord would not wish to claim such power for himself? But as he walked through those silent streets, his boots echoing in the emptiness, he began to understand that he had not stumbled upon an armory. He had discovered a crime scene, and the criminal, he sensed with growing unease, was still at large. It was in the depths, far beneath the planet's crust, that he found the archive. The Praetorians had built it as their final desperate message to whatever civilization might one day discover their remains. The entrance had been sealed behind layers of alloys that even his most advanced plasma cutters struggled to penetrate, and the passage downward stretched for kilometers, a descending spiral that seemed to bore toward the very heart of the world. The walls along this passage were carved with pictoglyphs, a visual language that transcended the limitations of spoken word, and as Thanos descended, he began to read. At first, the story was familiar: the rise of a civilization, the conquest of their world, the reaching toward the stars with hands extended in wonder and ambition. But then the narrative shifted. A new figure appeared in the carvings, rendered not with the precision of the other images, but with a deliberate distortion, as though the very act of depicting it accurately was somehow forbidden or impossible. A massive humanoid form, wreathed in cosmic energy, descending from the heavens, not as a visitor, but as a progenitor, a celestial. The pictoglyphs showed the being descending to primitive Praeteria, when the dominant life forms were still little more than aquatic organisms, crawling toward the shore. The celestial did not conquer, it did not destroy. Instead, with impossible delicacy, it reached into the genetic code of life itself, and twisted, adjusted, improved. The carvings showed the explosion of biodiversity that followed, the rapid evolution that elevated a species of simple primates into beings capable of thought, of creativity, of reaching toward the stars. The celestials, the pictoglyphs, explained in their silent visual language, were gardeners, shepherds, divine protectors who watched over their chosen worlds with benevolent omniscience. For millennia, the Praetorians had worshipped their creator, had built temples in its honor, had offered prayers of thanksgiving to the cosmic intelligence that had lifted them from the mud and shown them the light of consciousness. And then the narrative turned dark. The archive chamber itself was vasta, spherical room whose walls were covered in the crystalline storage medium that contained the sum total of Praetorian knowledge. At its center floated a holocrystal, still active after 3 millennia, waiting with the patience of the dead for someone, anyone, to witness its final message. When Thanos activated it, the crystal blossomed into light, and a recording began to play the last words of the Praetorian High Archivists, recorded in the final hours before the end. The face that materialized in the hologram was alien, yet unmistakably humanoid, and its expression carried a horror that transcended species barriers. The archivist spoke, and though the language was ancient and dead, the translation matrices within Thanos's armor rendered the words into something comprehensible. To whoever discovers this archive, we beg you, flee this place, flee this galaxy if you can. What we thought was benediction was cultivation. What we believed was divine protection was farming. The celestial returned, not as savior, but as harvester. We finally understood in those last moments why it had changed us, why it had accelerated our evolution, why it had shielded us from the dangers of the cosmos. We were not its children. We were its asterisk, crop asterisk. The hologram showed the celestials' returna, being so vast it eclipsed the sun, its hand outstretched toward the planet, not in blessing but in asterisk, claiming asterisk, and from that hand had poured a light, a terrible radiance that had touched every living thing on Praeteria simultaneously. The archivist's voice cracked with despair as it continued. We felt it, all of us, at once. Our life force, our consciousness, our very asterisk souls, asterisk being drawn upward, harvested like wheat at the end of summer. The celestial was birthing, using our accumulated psychic energy, the sum total of 6 billion lifetimes of thought and emotion and experience, to fuel its own emergence into a higher state of being. We were not individuals to it. We were nutrients. We were fuel. We were the recording cutoff. In the sudden silence that followed, Thanos stood motionless, his mind racing through the implications with the cold precision of a blade finding vital arteries. The archive's subsidiary databanks opened before him, responding to his presence, offering their accumulated knowledge freely in the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, might learn from Praeteria's fate and what knowledge it was. The Praeterians, in their final centuries, had turned their considerable technological prowess toward understanding the Celestials. They had cataloged sightings across the galaxy. They had studied the myths and legends of 1,000 worlds. They had identified a pattern that, once seen, could never be unseen. Worlds that had been seeded by the Celestials, where life had evolved at impossible speeds, where civilizations had risen to greatness under the watchful eyes of their cosmic protectors, and where inevitably, always the population had reached a critical mass and then simply ... vanished. The Celestials returned to reap what they had sown. The archive displayed a star chart, and Thanos felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest as he recognized the marked worlds. Xandar, Zenhuberi, Sakar, dozens of others, hundreds of others, scattered across the known universe like carefully tended gardens. And there, marked with the same ominous sigil, a small blue-green world in a backwater system, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star Earth. But it was the final entry in the archive that truly broke him, the entry that transformed horror into something approaching apocalyptic certainty. The Praeterians had managed to access fragments of celestial record-keeping, had decrypted the cosmic census that these beings maintained of their various farms. And there, listed among the failed harvests, the worlds that had destroyed themselves before reaching maturity, was a name Thanos knew as intimately as his own heartbeat: Titan, his homeworld, his people, the collapse that had defined his entire existence, that had birthed his philosophy of necessary culling, that had driven him to become what he was. It had not been a failure of resource management. Titan had been a asterisk failed harvest asterisk. The Celestials had seeded his world, had cultivated his people, and something had gone wrong. The population had collapsed before reaching the critical mass required for harvesting, and the Celestials had simply moved on, abandoning Titan to its slow death, like a gardener who shrugs at a blighted plant and turns attention to healthier specimens. Everything he had believed about his own history was a lie. The tragedy that had shaped him was not a lesson in the necessity of a cosmic farming operation that treated entire species as renewable resources. His people had died not because they consumed too much, but because they had failed to produce enough asterisk life force asterisk to be worth harvesting. Thanos stood in that archive for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of the Praeterian dead, as the full weight of revelation crushed down upon him. The universe he thought he knew, vast and uncaring, but ultimately neutral, was revealed to be a carefully managed system, a cosmic agricultural zone where sentient beings were cultivated like crops, where the very act of evolution and consciousness was merely a process of fattening before the slaughter. And the Celestials were everywhere, watching, waiting, tending their gardens with infinite patience, secure in the knowledge that no matter how long it took, no matter what struggles and triumphs the individual plants experienced, eventually, inevitably, they would return to reap what they had sown. As he ascended from the depths of Praeteria, carrying with him the archives, data crystals, and the crushing weight of cosmic truth, Thanos felt something fundamental shift within him. The ambitions of a mere warlord seemed laughably small now, the petty concerns of conquest and empire reduced to childish games in the shadow of this revelation. What value was there in ruling a galaxy when the galaxy itself was merely a farm awaiting harvest? No. If he was to act, if he was to find meaning in the face of this existential horror, he would need to think larger, grander. He would need to become not a conqueror, but a liberator. Though the liberation he envisioned would be so terrible, so absolute, that the universe would curse his name for eternity. And he would accept that curse gladly, would wear it like a crown, because some truths are too terrible to speak aloud, and some salvation can only be delivered by the hands of devils. As his ship lifted from Praeteria's dead surface, Thanos cast one final glance at the world below. Somewhere out there in the unfathomable distances between galaxies, the celestial that had harvested this world was gestating growing toward whatever higher form of existence it sought. Fueled by the stolen lives of 6 billion souls who had committed no crime except the sin of existing in the wrong garden at the wrong time. "I will remember you," he whispered to the dead world. "I will remember all of you, and what was done to you will not be done to others. This I swear, on the ashes of Titan, on the graves of every harvested world, the Celestials will starve. It was, though he did not yet know it, a declaration of war, a secret war, a war that one being would wage against gods, armed with nothing but terrible knowledge and an even more terrible resolve. The first battle had already been won. He now knew the enemy's name. The years that followed were a tapestry of carefully orchestrated violence, each thread woven with purpose that only Thanos himself could fully comprehend. To the universe at large, he remained what he had always been, a conqueror, a tyrant, a madman obsessed with balance. His armies swept across the galaxy, and in their wake, worlds burned and populations were culled. The story was always the same. Thanos would arrive, speak his gospel of necessary sacrifice, and order half of every population murdered to preserve the other half from inevitable resource collapse. It was a simple story, a comprehensible evil, and like all effective lies, it contained enough truth to be believable. But if one looked closer, and no one did, because who studies the methodology of monsters? A pattern emerged. The worlds Thanos chose to visit were not random. They were not selected based on population density or resource strain. No, the mad Titan-S path across the galaxy traced a different map entirely. A map of celestial seeds. He was studying them, learning. Each culled population was not just a demonstration of his twisted philosophy, but an experiment in understanding the celestial cultivation process. How did the seeds grow? How did the celestials monitor their progress? What psychic signature did a ready world emit that might draw the harvesters back? And most crucially, could the harvest be interrupted? It was on Zenhuberi that he found his first confirmation, though that discovery would cost him in ways he could not yet imagine. The world was beautiful, a jewel of green and gold, suspended in the darkness of space, and its people had reached that perfect balance of technological sophistication and population density that made them prime targets for cultivation. Thanos could feel it as his ships descended, a subtle vibration in the fabric of reality, a low-frequency hum that existed just below the threshold of normal perception. The celestial seed was gestating asterisk. The world was nearly ripe. He ordered the cull with his usual cold efficiency, and amidst the chaos and the screaming, he found a child green-skinned fierce-eyed, radiating a will to survive that pierced even his armored heart. He took her, this little Gamora, and as he walked away from her burning world, he felt the psychic hum shift and fade. By reducing the population so dramatically, he had disrupted the gestation process. The seed would go dormant, its harvest delayed by centuries, or perhaps millennia. He had saved them in his way, saved them from a fate they would never know to fear, and they would hate him for it forever, this child most of all. The irony was not lost on him, but it was on another world, one whose name has been lost to history, that Thanos experienced the true measure of what he had set himself against. The planet was primitive, its population barely past the hunter-gatherer stage, but they had built temples, vast cyclopean structures of stone that predated their current level of civilization by millennia. And at the center of their largest temple, buried beneath layers of ritual and superstition, lay the source of their worship, a sleeping celestial. Thanos descended into the temple depths alone, driven by a compulsion he did not fully understand. The passage spiraled downward through living rock, and with each step he felt the pressure build, not physical pressure, but something far more oppressive, a presence, that pressed against his consciousness like the weight of an ocean, vast and patient, and utterly, fundamentally alien. The chamber at the bottom was impossibly large, its dimensions seeming to defy the physical constraints of the planet itself. And there, suspended in a matrix of crystallized time, was the celestial seed, not yet born, not yet conscious in any way that mortal minds could comprehend, but waiting. Even in this protostate, even unformed and dormant, it radiated power that made Thanos' knees weak. This was not a being, this was a force of nature, a fundamental principle of the universe given form and purpose. He reached out, his hand trembling with the effort of movement against the psychic pressure, and touched the crystal surface. The contact was like grasping a live star. In an instant, visions flooded his mind, not thoughts or memories, but pure, overwhelming impressions of scale and purpose beyond mortal comprehension. He saw the universe not as a collection of individual worlds and beings, but as an ecosystem, a living thing that required cultivation and management. He saw the Celestials as they saw themselves, gardeners of cosmic order, pruners of reality's infinite branches, ensuring that the universe itself remained healthy and balanced according to metrics that transcended individual suffering or joy. They did not hate the beings they harvested. They did not love them either. The concepts of hatred and love were as meaningless to the Celestials as a farmer's feelings toward wheat. The harvest was simply necessary part of the grand cycle of cosmic existence. The great wheel of creation and destruction that had turned since before time had meaning, and there were many of them, hundreds, thousands, an entire species of cosmic entities, each one capable of snuffing out civilizations with a gesture, each one tending their assigned section of reality's garden with methodical precision. They were not evil in any sense that mortal philosophy could encompass. They were simply operating according to their nature, fulfilling their role in the universe's grand design, which made them, Thanos realized as he recoiled from the psychic contact, all the more terrifying. One cannot reason with a fundamental force. One cannot negotiate with gravity, cannot plead with entropy, cannot convince the void to offer mercy. The Celestials would harvest because that was what they were and they would continue to harvest until reality itself finally flickered and died in the heat death at the end of all things. Conventional warfare was useless. Even if he could somehow unite every civilization in the universe against the man, he could not, for who would believe such a tale? The combined might of all mortal weapons would be as gnats attacking a mountain. The Celestials were woven into the fabric of reality itself. To fight them was to fight existence, to wage war against the fundamental laws of cosmic operation. He could not destroy them. But perhaps, with the right tools, with sufficient power drawn from sources that predated the Celestials themselves, perhaps he could starve them. The thought came to him not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow certainty that crystallized over weeks and months of obsessive meditation. He retreated to his sanctuary, dismissed his armies, and spent long cycles in solitude, staring at the star charts from the Praeterian archive. The celestial seeds were everywhere, scattered across thousands of worlds, each one slowly maturing, each population unknowingly marching toward the day when the harvesters would return. But what if that day never came? What if the crops failed, not through natural disaster or self-destruction, but through careful, calculated intervention? What if someone were to cull every seeded world simultaneously, reducing their populations below the critical threshold required for harvest? The Celestials would not die. They were too fundamental for true death, but they would weaken, they would grow dormant. Their attention would turn elsewhere, to other galaxies, other gardens, more easily tended. And the current crop of civilizations, the billions upon billions of beings who lived in blissful ignorance of the true nature of their existence, would be granted something precious beyond measure. Time, centuries, perhaps millennia, of freedom from the harvest, time to grow, to evolve, to perhaps become strong enough to face the truth when the Celestials finally returned. Time to live and love and die according to their own choices rather than the cosmic agricultural calendar of indifferent gods. But such an intervention would require power beyond imagining, power that could reach across the entire universe simultaneously, power that predated the Celestials themselves and existed outside their cosmic order. The Infinity Stones. The whisper of them had haunted his research since Praeteria. The Praeterian archives had mentioned them only in passing 6 singularities of condensed power that had existed since before the current iteration of reality, remnants of the previous universe that had somehow survived the Big Bang and crystallized into conceptual form, space, time, mind, soul, reality, power. 6 fundamental principles, 6 tools that could reshape existence itself if properly wielded. The Celestials feared them. He had felt that fear in his psychic contact with the sleeping seed of feigned anxiety buried deep in the collective unconscious of their species. The stones were older than the Celestials, more fundamental, and in the right hands, they could unmake even the gardeners themselves. But such power came with a price. The stones were scattered across the universe, each one guarded by civilizations or entities that understood, however dimly, their terrible importance. To collect them would require cunning, force, and an absolute willingness to sacrifice everything: morality, honor, even the love of those closest to him on the altar of terrible necessity. Could he do it? Could he become the devil the universe needed, knowing that even success would leave him cursed and despised for all eternity? In his sanctuary, surrounded by the cold silence of space, Thanos smiled for the first time since Praeteria. It was not a smile of joy or anticipation, but the grim expression of a man accepting an unbearable burden. "Yes," he whispered to the darkness. "I can. I must." And with that acceptance, the mad titan ceased to exist. In his place stood something new, a weapon aimed at the heart of divinity, a cosmic insurgent waging secret war against gods, a savior wrapped in the skin of history's greatest monster. The universe would hate him for what he was about to do. And that, he decided, was precisely as it should be. For what is a savior but a monster willing to bear the weight of necessary evil so that others might remain innocent? What is sacrifice but the willingness to be misunderstood, reviled, and ultimately destroyed, if only the mission succeeds? The path forward was clear now. He would collect the stones. He would build the gauntlet. He would perform the snap heard across the universe. And in doing so, he would disrupt the celestial harvest so completely, so absolutely, that the cosmic gardeners would have no choice but to retreat, to turn their attention elsewhere, to abandon this section of reality to its own devices. Half the universe would die. It was a staggering number, an incomprehensible atrocity that would echo through history as the single greatest act of genocide ever committed. But weighed against the alternative, the complete and total harvest of all life by the Celestials, it was necessary. It was mercy. It was, he told himself, in the long, sleepless nights that followed, the only way. And if he had to break himself, had to shatter his own soul on the wheel of this terrible purpose, then so be it. Some wars cannot be won. They can only be endured, and someone had to be willing to endure, to carry the weight, to become the monster that lurked in the darkness so that others might walk in the light. That someone, he decided with grim finality, would be him. The hunt for the Infinity Stones began with the whisper of a legend and a journey to a place whose name the universe spoke only in hushed, frightened tones. He would commission the gauntlet from Eitri, the dwarf king, who alone possessed the skill to forge a vessel capable of containing such power. He would track the tesseract, the ether, the orbeach, one a piece of the puzzle, each one bringing him closer to the terrible apotheosis that awaited. And at the end of that journey, on a distant world where the Soul Stone lay waiting, he would face the price that all great power demands, the sacrifice of love itself. But that moment lay in the future, shrouded in the mists of possibility and dread. For now, in the eternal present of his sanctuary, Thanos began the work that would define the remainder of his existence. He began the preparations for the secret war that would determine whether the universe would remain a garden tended by cosmic farmers, or whether it might, just possibly, seize the chance to grow wild and free. The Celestials had sown their seeds across reality. But Thanos, the god-killer in waiting, had his own plans for the harvest, and they would not be pleased. There is a place beyond the edge of mapped space where stone weeps and the cosmos holds its breath. The natives called it Wormir, though few living beings had ever spoken that name aloud and returned to tell of it. It was a world wrapped in perpetual twilight, its sun a dying ember that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. Here, at the summit of a mountain that seemed to claw at the heavens in futile desperation, lay the final test. Thanos ascended the mountain with Gamora at his side, his daughter, his weapon, his greatest achievement, and his deepest regret. She did not know why they had come to this forsaken place. She could not comprehend the calculation that churned behind his weary eyes. In her innocence, she believed she still had cards to play, still had agency in the cosmic game unfolding around her. She was wrong, though he wished with an intensity that surprised him that she were right. The Stonekeeper materialized before them like a ghost of ancient crimes, his face shrouded in darkness, his voice the rasp of wind through empty tombs. Red Skull, the voice identified him as, though the name meant nothing to Thanos. What mattered was the knowledge this specter possessed, the terrible currency he demanded for the Soul Stone's release. A soul for a soul, the Stonekeeper intoned, his words echoing across the mountain's face like a judgment from which there could be no appeal. The stone demands sacrifice, a sacrifice of love. That which you treasure most must be surrendered to the abyss, and only then will the stone reveal itself to you. Gamora laughed a sound of bitter, savage triumph. She believed herself safe. She believed, in her desperate naivety, that the mad Titan was incapable of love, that his heart was a barren wasteland where no tender thing could grow. She was wrong about that too, and the knowing of it broke something in Thanos that all the battles of his long, violent existence had failed to touch. He looked at her, then truly looked perhaps for the first time in years, and saw not the weapon he had forged from the fires of Zenhuberi's destruction, but the child who had stared at him with fierce, unbroken eyes, even as her world burned. He saw every moment of her childhood, every lesson taught, every small pride he had taken in her growth and strength. He saw the daughter he had never meant to love, but had loved anyway. Despite his best efforts at emotional isolation, despite the mission that demanded absolute focus, and he understood, with a clarity that was itself a form of agony, that the universe had conspired to present him with the cruelest test imaginable. To save everything, he would have to destroy the one thing he had allowed himself to treasure. To become the savior no one wanted, he would have to commit the sin for which no redemption was possible. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and meant it with every fiber of his being. What followed was a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity. Gamora's dawning horror as she realized the truth, her struggles against his iron grip, her screams that echoed across Wormir's desolate landscape like accusations shouted at an indifferent universe. And then the fall, the terrible, final arc of her body as gravity claimed its due, and the impact far below that sounded impossibly like the breaking of his own heart. He stood at the precipice, staring down into the abyss that had swallowed his daughter, and felt something fundamental tear loose inside him. Tears fell when had he last wept, carving trails through the dust on his face, each one a small death, a fragment of his soul, acknowledging the price paid. The soul stone materialized in his hand, warm and pulsing with a light that seemed to pierce directly into his consciousness. And with that light came vision, not sight, but a deeper perception that tore through the veils, separating reality from the infinite spaces beyond. He saw souls, countless billions of them, each one a spark of light in the cosmic darkness, each one precious and unique and utterly, terrifyingly temporary. He saw the vast tapestry of life as the soul stone perceived it, not as individuals or civilizations, but as a great, interconnected web of consciousness, all of it singing together in a symphony of existence that transcended language or understanding. And there, surrounding that web, like a predator's shadow, he felt them, the celestials, not as beings or entities, but as an enormous collective hunger that pressed against the boundaries of mortal perception. They were watching, always watching, waiting with infinite patience for the crops to ripen, for the soul light to reach critical luminosity, for the moment when the harvest could begin and all that beautiful, painful, precious consciousness could be drawn upward and consumed to fuel their own incomprehensible existence. In that moment of vision, granted by the stone's terrible insight, Thanos felt the full weight of what he opposed. The Celestials were not evil, they were beyond such concepts, but their indifference was itself a kind of horror. To them, each individual soul was not a person, but calorie, a unit of energy to be consumed without ceremony or acknowledgement. The love, the loss, the struggle and triumph that defined each mortal existence meant nothing to them. They were farmers, contemplating wheat, accountants, tallying resources, and the universe, in its ignorant bliss, worshipped them as gods. "I am not mad," he whispered to the soul stone, to Gamora's ghost, to the universe itself. "I am the only one sane enough to see the truth, and I will not fail. I cannot, for if I do, then all these deaths will have been for nothing." The stone pulsed in his hand, its warmth neither confirmation nor condemnation. It simply was waiting to be wielded, waiting to play its part in the grand cosmic drama that was rapidly approaching its climax. Thanos descended from Wormir's mountain, a different being than the one who had ascended. He had entered as a warlord with a terrible plan. He emerged as a prophet who had glimpsed the true face of cosmic horror and accepted, with absolute finality, the burden of being the only one willing to act against it. The remaining stones were trivial now, by comparison. The Mind Stone, the Time Stone, the Power Stone he had already claimed. They were simply tools, means to an end that had been written in the stars since Praeteria's dead halls had whispered their terrible truth. As his ship lifted from Wormir's surface, leaving behind a grave that no one would ever visit, Thanos activated the ship's long-range scanners and called up the star chart from the Praeterian archive. The celestial seeds glowed like embers across the map of the galaxy, hundreds of them, thousands, each one a world populated by beings who did not know that their entire existence was simply the growing season before a harvest they would not survive. Earth appeared on the display, highlighted by the archive's ancient warning systems. The third planet from Sol, populated by a fractious species of primates who had only recently developed the capacity for space travel. A young civilization, barely past its infancy, but already showing the signs of celestial cultivation, the impossible speed of their technological development, the psychic potential latent in their genetics. The thin barriers between their reality and the dimensional energies the Celestials used for observation. They were being watched, tended, prepared, and if Thanos failed, they would share Praeteria's fate within a few centuries at most. All their art and music, all their wars and philosophies, all the countless small moments of beauty and connection that defined human existence, all of it would be rendered into fuel for a Celestial's birth, as meaningless to the harvester as the individual grain is to the reaper. Not while I breathe, he swore to the darkness. Not while the stones burn in my hand. Not while there is still a chance, however slim, however costly, to break the cycle. The path to the snap was clear now. He knew where the remaining stones could be found. He knew the resistance he would face: the Avengers, the Guardians, all the self-righteous heroes who fought for justice without comprehending the true nature of the threat they all faced. They would oppose him with everything they had, would call him mad and monstrous and evil, and they would be right from their limited perspective. For how could he explain? How could he make them understand that the greatest evil was not what he intended to do, but what would happen if he didn't. So he would let them hate him, would let them believe the lie of balance, because the truth was too terrible for their heroic narratives to contain. He would become the villain they needed, the monster whose defeat would unite them in purpose and righteousness. And in the moment of his triumph, when the gauntlet sat complete upon his hand, and the power of creation itself coursed through his veins, he would perform the act that would save them all and damn him forever. He would snap, half the universe would turn to dust. Trillions upon trillions of lives, each one precious, each one mourned. The Avengers would despise him. History would curse his name, and somewhere in the spaces between realities where the Celestials waited in their patient hunger, there would be a moment of terrible realization, a collective gasp, as the cosmic gardeners discovered that their carefully tended farms had been culled in an instant, their harvest disrupted on a scale that beggared comprehension. For the first time in eons, the Celestials would know hunger, true hunger, the kind that gnawed at the soul and demanded attention. And in that hunger, in that sudden, shocking need, they would make mistakes, they would be vulnerable, they would, perhaps, be defeatable. But that was a battle for the future, for civilizations yet unborn who might grow strong enough in their granted centuries to face the truth of their existence. His role was simpler: to be the devil who broke the wheel, the monster who shattered the cosmic order, the sacrifice upon which the future's freedom would be built. The soul stone pulsed in his hand, a heartbeat that was not his own, a reminder of the price already paid. Gamora's face haunted him, would haunt him until his dying breath, but he could not stop, would not stop. For to stop now, to allow sentiment or second thoughts to derail the mission, would transform her sacrifice from tragedy into meaningless waste. She had died so that the universe might live. He would ensure that death meant something, even if it meant walking through fire and emerging as the most hated being in all of existence. "I'm sorry," he whispered again to the ghost of his daughter. "I'm sorry for what you were. I'm sorry for what I made you. And I'm sorry that I must continue, must finish what your death began. But I will not fail you. I will not fail them. The harvest ends with me." The ship accelerated toward its next destination, toward the confrontation on Titan and then on Earth, toward the moment when all the careful preparation would culminate in a single, universe-shattering gesture. Thanos sat in the command throne, his hand clutching the Soul Stone, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Somewhere out there, the Celestials waited in their cosmic gardens. They did not know it yet, but their day of reckoning was coming. The mad Titan had seen their true face and had not looked away. He had felt their hunger and had decided with a clarity that transcended sanity or madness that he would rather be damned than allow their harvest to continue unchallenged. The secret war was entering its final phase, and win or lose, live or die, the universe would never be the same. The moment arrived like the tolling of a bell that only Thanos could hear, a resonance that vibrated through every atom of his being as the final Infinity Stone settled into place upon the gauntlet. The Mind Stone pried from Vision's forehead amidst the chaos of Wakanda's desperate last stand, glowed with golden luminescence as it merged with its siblings: space, reality, power, soul, time, mind. 6 concepts, 6 keystones of existence, now unified in a single vessel wrapped around his massive hand. The power that surged through him in that moment of completion was beyond description, not merely energy, but a fundamental connection to the operating principles of the universe itself. He could feel everything, all at once, every star burning in the cosmic night, every world spinning through the void, every life spark flickering in the great darkness. The weight of omniscience pressed against his consciousness, threatening to shatter his sanity, but he held firm. He had not come this far to falter at the threshold. The Avengers charged. Of course they charged. Was their nature to fight, to resist, to never surrender, even when defeat was mathematically certain. Thor's axe buried itself in his chest with a force that would have killed any lesser being, and the Thunder God's face twisted with savage triumph as he leaned close. "You should have gone for the head," Thanos whispered, and raised his gauntleted hand. The gesture was almost gentle fingers coming together in a simple snap that echoed across the fabric of reality like a pebble dropped into still water, the ripples spreading outward at speeds that mocked the laws of physics. For a single, eternal instant, the universe held its breath, and then the dusting began. On Titan, soldiers crumbled into ash and were carried away on alien winds. On Earth, heroes dissolved mid-cry, their atoms dispersing like thoughts at the edge of sleep. Across the galaxy, on worlds whose names would never be spoken aloud again, half of all living things simply ... ceased. Not violently, not painfully, just a gentle transition from existence to absence, as though reality had decided that they were thoughts it no longer needed to think. But Thanos felt something else, something that no one else could perceive, because no one else wore the complete gauntlet. No one else had willingly merged their consciousness with the fundamental forces of creation. Through the stone's infinite perception, he heard it. Whale asterisk. It was not sound in any conventional sense. It was a psychic scream that tore across dimensions, a cry of such profound shock and hunger and sudden, terrible absence that it transcended language or comprehension. The Celestials, scattered across the universe in their cosmic gardens, had felt the snap not as a killing blow, but as a theft of unimaginable magnitude. In a single instant, half their harvest half across every seeded world simultaneously had been rendered into ash. The crops they had so carefully tended, the soul light they had cultivated over millennia, simply ... gone. For the first time in eons, the Celestials knew want true gnawing want, the comfortable certainty of their existence, The assurance that the harvest would always come when called had been shattered. And in that shattering, they had become aware, truly, fully aware of the one who had dared to interfere with the cosmic order. They were coming. He could feel their attention turning toward him like the gaze of a vast and terrible eye. Their collective focus narrowing down across the light years to find the source of this unprecedented disruption. Good, he thought through, the agony of the gauntlet's power burning through his arm, fusing metal to flesh. Let them come. This was always part of the plan. The rainbow light of the Bifrost materialized around him, and he used the space stone to flee before Thor could strike again. He appeared in his chosen sanctuary, a simple place, a garden world far from the major civilizations where he could tend to crops in the old way. With his hands in the soil and the sun warm on his back, the gauntlet hung heavy on his arm, the gem's light dimmed but not extinguished. The metal fused to his flesh in a permanent reminder of what he had done. He collapsed into the simple dwelling he had prepared for this moment. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thanos allowed himself to feel the weight of his exhaustion. The snap had accomplished its purpose. The cosmic balance had been disrupted, the harvest cycle broken, at least for now. But the war was not over. The secret war, the true conflict that lay hidden beneath the surface narrative of heroism and villainy, had only just entered its final phase. And so he waited in his garden, tending his crops with burned and broken hands, watching the sun rise and set over alien hills. The Avengers would come eventually, he knew this, with the certainty that the Time Stone had granted him. They would seek their vengeance, would demand justice for the dead. He would allow them their moment. He would let them believe they had one, that his death meant something in the grand cosmic calculation. But before that final act of theater, before the curtain fell on the tragedy of the Mad Titan, he had one more task to perform. One final battle in the secret war that no one else knew was being fought, because the Celestials were coming. And when they arrived, when they descended upon his garden, seeking the one who had dared to disrupt their harvest, he would be waiting with the last reserves of the gauntlet's terrible power. He would use the reality stone to scramble the universe's psychic signature, to introduce enough cosmic noise that the Celestus's carefully maintained census of their seeded worlds would become unreliable, corrupted. He would use the space stone to fold reality in ways that made the remaining populations difficult to locate, hiding them in the dimensional shadows like prey, learning to avoid the predator's gaze. And if necessary, the Celestials proved too persistent, too determined to restore their broken harvest, he would use what remained of the Gauntlet's power to strike at them directly. Not to kill, he doubted even the combined stones could truly destroy beings so fundamental to reality's fabric, but to hurt to wound them deeply enough that they would retreat, would turn their attention elsewhere, would abandon this section of the cosmos as too much trouble to tend. Half the universe had died, so that the other half might be hidden from the cosmic farmers. It was a trade measured in oceans of blood and mountains of ash, but it was the only trade available, and he had made it willingly, with open eyes, accepting the damnation that came with such calculations. The sun set on his garden, and in the gathering darkness, Thanos saw a new light appear on the horizon. Not the light of stars, but something larger, something that eclipsed the celestial bodies and cast a shadow across the world. A hand, vast beyond mortal comprehension, was descending from the sky. Orisham, the judge, or one of his infinite siblings, had arrived to investigate the blight upon its garden. The secret war was about to become very real. Thanos stood, his broken body protesting every movement, the ruined gauntlet hanging like a dead weight from his scarred arm. Around him, the simple vegetables he had planted with such care seemed suddenly Precious's small rebellion against the horror of cosmic agriculture, an act of creation in defiance of the great destructive cycle that the Celestials represented. "Come then," he whispered to the descending god. "I am ready. I have always been ready. For I am Thanos of Titan, the god-killer, the harvest-breaker, the mad prophet who saw your true face and did not turn away. And even if you strike me down, even if you unmake me, atom by atom, know this, the gauntlet flared to life one final time, its gems burning with light that hurt to witness. I have already won." What transpired in that garden, in the terrible minutes before the Avengers arrived to claim their vengeance, is a story that will never be told. There were no witnesses, no records, no evidence beyond the broken gauntlet and the burned earth, and a mad titan whose eyes held secrets that died with him when Gamora's sister finally brought her blade across his neck. But if we could pierce the veils of that hidden moment, if we could see with the eyes of stones and gods, we would witness something unprecedented, a mortal and a celestial locked in combat, reality itself warping and screaming under the strain of their conflict. Erisham was vast, so vast that the concept of size became meaningless in his presence. He was not simply large. He was a compression of cosmic principle into something approaching physical form, a concept of judgment and order given shape and will. The mere fact of his attention was enough to crush lesser minds, and his power could unmake worlds with the casual gesture of a gardener pulling weeds. But Thanos had the gauntlet, broken, yes, burned out, certainly, but still containing the dregs of the most fundamental forces in creation, and he wielded them with the desperate precision of a being who had nothing left to lose. The reality stone flared, and the garden became a battleground, where physics were suggestions rather than laws. The space stone folded dimensions, creating recursive geometries that even Erisham's vast perception struggled to navigate. The time stone bent causality into a pretzel, making past and future simultaneous, forcing the Celestial to fight not one Thanos, but 1,000 potential versions across branching timelines. And through it all, the Soul Stone sung a mournful song of all the lives that had been lost, all the harvests that had been stolen, all the civilizations that had died in ignorance of the true nature of their shepherds. It was an indictment written in the language of pure consciousness, and even a celestial could not entirely ignore its terrible poetry. The battle lasted seconds. It lasted centuries. Time lost meaning in the space where two impossibilities collided. But when it finally ended, when the reality stone's last gasps finally failed, and the gauntlet went dark and dead, Thanos had accomplished his true purpose. He had used the space stone to fracture reality's dimensional barriers, creating a cosmic white noise that would persist for millennia. The Celestials' carefully maintained sense of their seeded worlds, the psychic census they used to track the harvest cycle, had been scrambled beyond recognition. Every reading was now corrupted, every signal twisted by dimensional static. The farms were still there, but the farmers could no longer find them reliably. They would have to search manually, world by world, a process that would take longer than even their ageless patience could easily sustain. He had used the reality stone to alter the fundamental psychic signature of sapient life, throughout the affected regions of space. The taste that Celestials use to identify ripe populations had been changed, made strange and unpalatable. The harvest was not impossible now, merely unappealing, like a farmer discovering that all his crops had been subtly poisoned. Still technically edible, but requiring more effort than they were worth. And he had used his own life force, channeled through the Soul Stone, to sever the ethereal tethers that connected the celestial seeds to their progenitors. The sleeping gods remained, yes, but they were now isolated, their gestations paused indefinitely, without the psychic link to guide their development. They would remain dormant until someone consciously awakened the process that no mortal civilization was likely to stumble upon by accident. In short, he had made the universe unpalatable to its cosmic farmers. He had rendered the garden wild, its crops unharvestable, its carefully managed order thrown into chaos. It was not a perfect victory. The Celestials remained, and given enough time, they would adapt to the new conditions, would find ways around his interference. But he had bought the universe something precious beyond measure. Time, centuries, perhaps millennia. An entire epoch in which mortal civilizations could grow and thrive without the shadow of harvest looming over them. Without the knowledge that their highest achievements were merely the fattening process before the slaughter. As Arisham's vast form retreated not in defeat, but in something approaching confusion, the first such emotion the judge had felt in eons. Thanos collapsed into the ruins of his garden. The gauntlet was dead weight now, its gems cracked and dark, its metal cooling as it finally released its grip on his cooked flesh. He had minutes, at most, before the Avengers arrived. Minutes to rest, to reflect on all that had transpired since that first discovery in Praeteria's dead halls. He had become the universe's greatest monster, in service of a truth that no one could be allowed to know. He had sacrificed his soul, his daughter, his very self, on the altar of necessary evil. And it had worked. Not perfectly, not completely. The Celestials still existed, still hungered, still maintained their cosmic purpose. But they had been wounded, their harvest disrupted, their cosmic order thrown into disarray. The mortal universe had been granted a reprieve from the cycle of cultivation and reaping, a chance to determine its own destiny rather than being reduced to fuel for the hunger of gods. As the rainbow light of the Bifrost began to glow on the horizon, as the Avengers finally arrived to claim their vengeance, Thanos closed his eyes and allowed himself a single moment of peace. He had been many things in his long existence: conqueror, philosopher, father, monster. But in the end, he had become the one thing the universe needed most and wanted least. A savior wrapped in the skin of history's greatest devil. A hero whose victory would be celebrated by no one, whose sacrifice would never be acknowledged, whose true purpose would die with him as a secret too terrible to speak aloud. The Avengers found him there, broken and alone in his ruined garden. They demanded answers, explanations, some justification for the incomprehensible horror he had unleashed. And he gave them nothing, no grand speech, no final revelation. He let them believe the lie of balance, let them think they understood his madness, because some truths are too terrible to share, some burdens too heavy to pass on to others. The Avengers would rebuild. The universe would heal, and in their rebuilding, in their healing, they would never know how close they had come to a fate far worse than the snap. They would never know that the greatest act of salvation in cosmic history had been performed by the hands of a monster, had required the death of half the universe to prevent the harvest of all of it. They would never know that their true shepherds had been farmers preparing them for slaughter, or that a mad titan had burned himself to ashes to disrupt that cosmic agricultural cycle, and that Thanos decided in his final moments was exactly as it should be. Let them have their simple story. Let them believe in the evil of the mad titan and the righteousness of their own cause. Let them rebuild their universe in ignorance of how close they came to losing it all. When Gamora's sister finally brought her blade across his neck, when the light finally faded from his eyes, and the mad titan breathed his last, Thanos died with a secret smile on his lips. He had done it. Against all odds, against the will of cosmic gods, he had disrupted the harvest and granted the universe its freedom. The price had been everything. The reward was a damnation that would echo across eternity, and he would pay it gladly, would pay it 1,000 times over, if only to know that somewhere in the vast cosmos, children were growing up on worlds that would never know the horror of celestial harvest, never experience the violation of having their entire species reduced to fuel for an indifferent god's birth. Half the universe had died, but the other halfened all their descendants for millennia to come would, live, truly live, free from the shadow of cosmic agriculture, free to determine their own fates, without the knowledge that they were merely crops awaiting reaping. It was enough. It had to be enough. And so the mad titan died. His secret war finally ended. His terrible mission accomplished at a cost that would haunt the universe for generations to come. In the aftermath, the universe exhaled a collective sigh of relief as the dead returned, as the blip was reversed, as the Avengers achieved their impossible victory over the forces of chaos and madness. Statues were erected, monuments built. The names of the lost were carved in stone and spoken with reverence. The universe began, slowly, to heal from the wound that Thanos had inflicted. But if one knew where to look, and virtually no one did, there were signs of a different story. The Celestials, who had maintained a steady, predictable presence in the cosmic order since before recorded history became quiet. Their appearances, which had followed regular patterns, traceable across millennia, became sporadic, confused. Worlds that should have been visited were passed over. Seeds that should have gestated remained dormant. The cosmic farming operation had been disrupted, its efficiency destroyed, its careful cataloging rendered useless by dimensional static that persisted in defiance of all natural laws. The Celestials did not abandon their purpose. They could not, being entities of pure function and principle, but they turned their attention elsewhere, to other galaxies where the harvest remained predictable, where the signal-to-noise ratio hadn't been corrupted beyond recognition. The universe had been granted time, centuries, perhaps millennia, before the Celestials adapted to the new conditions and resumed their harvest of this particular cosmic garden. And in that time, if civilizations grew wise enough, if they learned the right lessons from the Praeterian archives or similar sources scattered across forgotten worlds, perhaps they could find a way to face the truth of their existence. Perhaps they could become strong enough to resist, to escape, to transcend the cycle of cultivation and harvest altogether. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the breathing room that Thanos had purchased with oceans of blood would ultimately mean nothing. a temporary reprieve before the inevitable return of the cosmic farmers. The future remained unwritten, its possibilities spreading outward in infinite branching paths. But on Earth, where a species of curious primates was slowly recovering from the trauma of the blip, where heroes mourned their dead and rebuilt their shattered world, no one knew how close they had come to a fate infinitely worse than the snap. No one understood that the Mad Titan's greatest crime had actually been the universe's salvation, that his monstrosity had been a mask for a mission of such desperate, terrible necessity that only one being in all of existence had been willing to attempt it. The Avengers believed they had won. History would record their victory. And in the simple story of good triumphing over evil, of heroes defeating the Mad Titan, there was comfort and hope and a narrative that made sense to minds unprepared for cosmic horror. The truth, his secret war concluded without witnesses, without record, without acknowledgement. The universe he had saved would curse his name for eternity, would use his example as a warning about the dangers of unchecked power and mad philosophy. And somewhere, in the vast spaces between galaxies, the Celestials drifted through the cosmic night, confused and hungry, unable to relocate the gardens they had so carefully tended. They would search, they would eventually adapt, but not today, not for a long, long time. Thanos had bought the universe, precisely what he promised: balance. Not the simple balance of population and resources that the parable described, but the cosmic balance between the cultivated and the wild, between the shepherded and the free. He had broken the wheel, shattered the cycle, and in doing so had transformed himself from warlord into weapon, from monster into martyr. History would never know, the Avengers would never understand, and the trillions of beings who lived and loved and died across the cosmos would never comprehend how close they came to being rendered into fuel for the birth of gods they had been taught to worship. But in the quiet spaces, in the dead archives of worlds like Praeteria, in the fragmented memories of the Infinity Stones themselves, scattered now across the time stream and lost to mortal access, the truth remained. A single being, granted terrible knowledge and burdened with impossible choice, had faced the cosmic order and had refused to bow. He had seen the true nature of the universe's shepherds and had declared, with actions rather than words, that the flocks deserved freedom, even if they would never know they had been enslaved. It was a victory that could never be celebrated, a salvation that could never be acknowledged, a sacrifice so profound that even speaking of it would diminish its terrible grandeur. The secret war was over. The Mad Titan was dead, and the universe, in its ignorance, had been saved. Time would tell if that salvation would be enough. Time would reveal whether the centuries Thanos had purchased would be spent wisely, whether civilizations would grow strong enough to face the truth when the Celestials inevitably returned. The future remained uncertain, its possibilities as infinite as the stars themselves. But for now, in this moment, the harvest had been disrupted, the farmers had retreated, and the garden, vast, chaotic, beautiful in its wild disorder, had been granted the most precious gift that any living thing can receive: the chance to grow free from the shadow of gods who view them as crops, the opportunity to determine their own destiny rather than marching unknowingly toward a harvest that would render their entire existence into fuel for entities beyond comprehension. Thanos had seen the secret war that raged beneath reality's surface, the conflict between cosmic order and mortal freedom, between the cultivated garden and the wild growth. And in his terrible wisdom, in his mad clarity, he had chosen a side. Not the side of order or chaos, not the side of good or evil, as those simple terms were commonly understood. He had chosen the side of the crops against the farmers, the side of the shepherded against the shepherds. And in that choice he had become something that transcended the simple categories of hero and villain, a cosmic insurgent who waged war against the very structure of reality, who dared to declare that mortal life had value beyond its utility as fuel for divine hunger. The universe would never build him statues, would never speak his name with reverence, would never understand what he had truly accomplished in his garden in those final moments before the Avengers arrived to claim their vengeance. And that, perhaps, was the final sacrifice. Not just his life, not just his soul, but his legacy, forever tainted by the lie he had told, forever misunderstood by the universe he had saved. He would be remembered as the mad titan, the genocidal maniac, the greatest monster in cosmic history. But in the silent spaces between realities, in the quantum foam, where the Soul Stone's consciousness still lingered, the truth remained. Thanos of Titan had fought a secret war against gods, and in the only way that mattered, in the only way that could ever have worked, he had one asterisk. Asterisk music swells gently, preparing for the conclusion, asterisk. And so we come to the end of this forbidden chronicle, traveler of the infinite dark. You have witnessed what no mortal was meant to see, the truth beneath the truth, the war beneath the war, the terrible choice that shaped the destiny of stars. Thanos bought this universe time, paid for it with oceans of blood and mountains of ash, and the price of that purchase was his own eternal damnation. But know this, as you drift now toward the embrace of sleep, the question that haunted his final moments remains unanswered. How long will the silence last? How long before the Celestials, those patient and hungry gods, finally adapt to the noise he created? How long before they wake from their confusion and remember the gardens they left behind? The harvest has been delayed, the cycle broken. But cycles, like all things in this vast and terrible universe, have a way of repeating. The mad prophet bought us time. What we do with that time, whether we waste it in ignorance or use it to grow strong enough to face the truth, remains to be seen. Sleep now, wanderer. Let these dark revelations fade into the comfortable shadows of dreams. And if you wake with the lingering sense that the universe is stranger and more terrible than you ever imagined, that the gods we worship might not have our best interests at heart, that salvation sometimes wears the face of monsters, ... well, perhaps that discomfort is the greatest gift this story can offer. A reminder that truth is rarely simple, that heroism exists in shadows as well as light, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the greatest acts of love are indistinguishable from the deepest crimes. Rest well. The universe spins on, wild and free, for a little while longer.